Okay, so we've been talking about counting atoms, and before we talk about how to count an atom using coefficients and subscripts, we're going to actually talk about how to identify what an atom is, or an element. And so right here I have a capital letter, and that capital letter tells me that that is an element, and that element happens to be hydrogen. So if I have a capital letter all by itself, it is an element. So this would be the element for carbon. This would be the element symbol for oxygen. We also have elements that have two letters associated to them. And so when I have a capital letter and a lowercase letter, that is one element. So Na with a capital N and a lowercase a is the symbol for sodium. Okay? This would also be just one element. Si is the symbol for silicone. And then we have Cl, lowercase l, capital C is our symbol for chlorine. Okay? So when I see HCO, I know that I have three elements present. I have hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. If I have NaCl, I don't have four elements there. I only have two. I have Na as one, Cl as my second element. Okay? So now we're ready to talk about counting atoms. First, when we talk about counting atoms, we need to know what a coefficient is, and we need to know what a subscript is. A coefficient is our large number that comes before the molecule. So for example, 2H3O, this 2 is my coefficient. So the coefficient tells me how many molecules I have present there. Okay? This 3 is my subscript, and it tells me how many of that one element I have. Okay? So if we're looking at C2, C12, right here, I know that this subscript tells me that I have 2 atoms of C. So I would write C equals 2. Then I look at this C, and it tells me that I have a subscript of 12. So C equals 12. I do not have a coefficient, so I'm not multiplying anything, but I have 2 C's present here, so I do have to add them together. So 12 plus 2 equals 14. So in this particular problem, I have 14 atoms of carbon. Okay? In this second example that I have over here, I've got BaSO4. First, I want to recognize the elements that are present. I have Ba, I have S, and I have O. So when I look at it, first I look to see if I have a coefficient. I do not, so I'm not going to be multiplying by anything. I see that I have no subscript here, so I know that I just have one Ba. Okay? This 4 is only attached to that oxygen, so I'm not going to attach it to the sulfur in front of it. So this sulfur right here does not have a subscript, so it is just equal to 1. And then for my oxygen, I have a subscript of 4, so it is 4. If I want to count total atoms in this formula, it would be 4 plus 1 plus 1. So there are 6 total atoms present. Okay? Let's look at some examples that are on our homework assignment. Okay, we have C2, C12, but we also have a coefficient of 2 right here. So when we're doing that, I'm going to list each one that I see. And I'm going to do for this first one 2 times 2, because I have a coefficient of 2, and then it has a subscript. So 2 times 2 equals 4. For my next C, I have a coefficient of 2 and a subscript of 12. So I have to multiply those together. So 2 times 12 equals 24. And to figure out how many total atoms of carbon I have to add those together. So 24 plus 4 equals 28. So for carbon, there are 28 total atoms present. Okay, let's look at another problem. 4Si2H6. If I'm looking at just the elements that are present, I have Si and H. I have to list both of those. And then I'm going to see how many atoms are present for each. For Si, I have a coefficient of 4 and a subscript of 2. So 4 times 2 equals 8. For my hydrogen, I have a coefficient of 4 and a subscript of 6. So 4 times 6 equals 24. Okay, so that's all I have to do. I'm just listing how many atoms are for each element there. Okay, our next problem, 8H2S. I have a coefficient of 8. So for hydrogen, I'm going to do 8 times 2, which equals 16. For sulfur, I do not have a subscript, but I still have to see that the coefficient is attached to that. So I have 8 times 1, which equals 8. Okay. All right, our next problem is NH4HCO3. This one's a little tricky because I see H twice in the problem, so I'm going to solve it just like I've solved every other one, and then I'm going to make sure I add all my H's in together. So I have N, H, C, and O. I do not have a coefficient, so I'm going to be looking at just the subscripts. So N does not have a subscript, so it's understood that it is just 1. My first hydrogen right here has a subscript of 4. So I know I have 4, but then I have another hydrogen right here. It does not have a subscript, so it is understood that it is 1. So I have 5 total hydrogens in this formula. For carbon, it does not have a subscript, so it's an understood 1. And for oxygen, it has a subscript of 3. Okay, if you are still having problems with understanding atoms, please ask your teacher.